The short-range missile cluster struck Jiang Wei-lin's right shoulder in a ragged chain of fire, and through the smoke brooming across his viewport he saw them. Three faces pressed against a fourth-floor window of the very building the missiles had come from. Mouths open in screams his cockpit seals would never carry. His targeting reticle drifted upward toward the rooftop, where the infantry team was already reloading, and his thumb settled against the autocannon trigger. The crosshairs swept across the window. He did not fire. Contact. Rooftop bearing 185, 40 meters elevation. The voice belonged to Salwei Lian Shufen, and it crackled through Jiang's neurohelmet speakers with the compressed urgency of someone who had already been shot at twice in the last 90 seconds. Her marauder stood 20 meters behind his cataphract in the narrow boulevard, its 75-ton frame filling the avenue nearly wall to wall, and Jiang heard the distinctive snap hiss of her paired particle projector cannons cycling to ready. "Hold fire, Lian," Jiang barked into the lance frequency. "Civilians in the structure. I say again, civilians visible, fourth floor and below." A beat of static. Then Lian's voice, lower, stripped of protocol. "Sang Wei, they're reloading up there." He knew. He could see it on his secondary display. The thermal bloom of warm bodies on the rooftop of the 8-story residential tower. 6 signatures moving with the jerky, purposeful rhythm of soldiers feeding fresh missile packs into shoulder-mounted launchers. Free World's League regulars. They had chosen their position well. The building was tall enough to deny his weapons a clean angle on the roof, without firing through the occupied floors below, and narrow enough that the alley behind it could hide a platoon. Zhang's cataphract stood 13 meters tall at the crown of its hunched, brutal torso, and the residential block rose another 12 meters above his head. The boulevard they occupied had once been a commercial district. Restaurants, small shops, a noodle house with a collapsed awning. But 3 days of fighting had transformed it into a canyon of shattered ferro-glass and partesite dust. Beersheba, capital city of Zion, had been beautiful once. That was before Bravo Company of the 1st Capellan Chargers had come to liberate it. Iron Company. "This is Iron One," Jiang said, keying the company-wide frequency. His throat was dry, and the cockpit temperature had already climbed past 40 degrees Celsius from the waste heat of his reactor and the fire burning in the commercial tower 2 blocks east. "All units hold position and report status. We are not advancing until I have a picture." The responses came in clipped Capellan military brevity, voices tight with adrenaline and heat exhaustion. "Iron 2, holding, armor nominal. I have contacts on thermals, northwest, maybe a land strength element behind the transit hub." That was Lian. "Iron 5, holding. Lost 3 armor segments off my left torso from that ambush at the interchange. Ammo is at 60%. Salwei Daokang's Crusader stood at the mouth of a cross street 200 meters south, its blocky missile racks angled toward the sky like the hunched shoulders of a prize fighter. Iron 9, holding. My AC-20 is running hot, and I've got a jam warning on the feed mechanism. Need 60 seconds. Chen Mei's hunchback crouched, as much as a 50-ton BattleMech could crouch, behind the remains of a parking structure. The enormous Tomodzuru Type 20 autocannon, built into its right torso, like a cannon from an ancient warship. Zhang listened to the rest of the reports filter in. 12 mechs had entered the Yiling district 6 hours ago. 12 mechs were still standing, though 3 were running with yellow or amber damage indicators, and all of them were baking in the accumulated heat of sustained combat in a concrete oven. Beersheba sat 12 degrees north of Zion's equator, and the late summer air was thick enough to chew. His single heat sinks were struggling. Every pilot in the company was struggling. Sangwei Zhang. The new voice on his comm was not one of his people. It was Zhong Shao Qiang, 3rd Battalion's commanding officer, transmitting from the mobile command post 3 kilometers behind the front line. The major's tone carried the particular flatness of a man who had been staring at a tactical map for too long and had forgotten that the colored icons represented human beings in overheated cockpits. "I'm showing your company stationary in grid reference Yiling 14. You are 40 minutes behind the advanced timeline. Explain." Zhang closed his eyes for 1 second. 1 second was all he could afford. When he opened them, the SRM team on the rooftop had finished reloading. He could see the faint silhouette of a launcher tube rising above the parapet. Iron 1 to Battalion. We are encountering heavier resistance than projected. Free Worlds League Infantry are fortified in civilian residential structures throughout the Yiling corridor. Request permission to bypass and isolate rather than reduce in place. The pause that followed lasted long enough for Zhang to hear his own heartbeat in his neural helmet's acoustic padding. Negative, Iron 1. Your orders are to clear the Yiling corridor to the river. Every block, every building. The 6th Merrick Militia has dug in along the waterfront, and if we leave their forward observers and missile teams in your rear, 2nd Battalion's flank is exposed when they push through tomorrow. You will advance. You will clear. Am I understood? Understood, Zhong Shao. The channel clicked dead, and Zhang sat alone in his cockpit, with the heat and the dust and the faces in the window. He had been a mech warrior for 11 years. He had earned his commission through the Xi'an War College's Accelerated program, graduated with honors in tactical doctrine, and received command of Bravo Company after his predecessor had died of a reactor containment failure during a training exercise on Sheen. He had fought border skirmishes against House Davion along the Chesterton front, and he had put down a bandit uprising on Warlock that had lasted 3 brutal weeks. He was not naive. He understood what war required, but he had never fought in a city like this. Open field combat had rules that a mech warrior could internalize: engagement ranges, terrain corridors, flanking geometry. A Cataphract's autocannon 10 could reach out accurately to 450 meters, and its particle projector cannon could touch targets even further. In open terrain, those were weapons of precision. Here, in the Yiling district, where the widest avenue barely stretched 60 meters across, and the tallest structures rose 30 stories overhead, precision was a myth. Here, every weapon was a close-range weapon, and every shot that missed its target, or punched through it, continued into something made of glass and concrete and human lives. Iron Company, Iron 1, Zhang transmitted. New orders from battalion. We advance and clear to the Suzhou River. Standard urban clearance protocol. Lien, your lance takes point. Dao, you are echelon left. 1 block south. Chen, keep that autocannon ready. I want you behind Lien's lance where your range is an asset, not a liability. My lance anchors center. He hesitated, then added, all units, weapons free on confirmed military targets only. I want positive identification before anyone pulls a trigger. If you cannot confirm, you call it in, and we work the problem together. Copy, Iron 1. Lien's voice was steady, professional. She was the best lance commander he had, a 15-year veteran who had fought on Bithynia and Boardwalk, and half a dozen other forgettable border worlds. If anyone could thread a 75-ton marauder through a city without flattening a neighborhood, it was Lien. Iron 5 copies. Weapons free. On confirmed targets only. Dao's voice carried a note Zhang did not like. Not quite resentment, but the weighted tone of a man who thought the restriction would get someone killed. And maybe it would. They moved. Lien's lance advanced first, her marauder leading at a walking pace of just over 43 kilometers per hour, which, in the confines of the Yiling district, felt absurdly fast. The sound was tremendous. 4 BattleMechs moving through a residential neighborhood created a rolling thunder of footfalls that shattered windows 3 blocks ahead of the column and sent cascades of loose concrete tumbling from damaged facades. Zhang watched through his forward cameras as a family, a man, a woman, 2 small children, burst from a ground-floor doorway and sprinted across the boulevard directly in front of Lien's marauder. Lien stopped. The 75-ton machine swayed forward on its momentum, then caught itself, and the family disappeared into an alley, the man carrying 1 child under each arm. Iron 2, moving again, Lien said, and if her voice shook, the comms compression hid it. They covered 3 blocks without contact. The buildings here bore the scars of earlier fighting. Cratered walls, blown-out storefronts, a transit bus lying on its side in the middle of an intersection, with its windows melted into slag. Zhang noted the damage patterns. Autocannon impacts. Laser scoring. Some of this was Capellan ordnance from 1st Battalion's push 2 days ago, and some of it bore the distinctive radiating fracture patterns of particle projector cannon fire. Free Worlds League weapons, fired outward from defensive positions. The 6th Merrick Militia had fought hard to hold this ground, and they had left their marks on every surface. The ambush came at the 4th block. Contact front. Mech scale, I count 3. No, 4. Boulevard intersection, 200 meters. Lien's transmission was half shouted, and Zhang heard the deep bass thrum of her twin PPCs firing in the background. On his tactical display, the forward lance's icons flared amber as the engagement began. He pushed his cataphract to a run, the machine's stride lengthening as the engine surged, carrying him toward the intersection at 64 kilometers per hour. The cataphract was not graceful. It was a brutal, squared-off design, all armor plate and weapon housings, built on Tikhonov, under the direction of engineers who valued firepower and protection over aesthetics. It did not run so much as charge, and the boulevard shuddered under its weight. He rounded the corner and saw the enemy. A Free Worlds League Orion stood in the center of the intersection, its 75 tons anchored behind a collapsed pedestrian overpass that gave it partial cover from the waist down. Its autocannon, 10, was already cycling. Zhang saw the muzzle flash a split second before the round struck the building facade to his right, punching through the wall in a shower of pulverized massite and rebar. 2 more enemy mechs flanked it, a boxy trebuchet crouched in the shadow of a parking garage, its twin long-range missile racks elevated for indirect fire over the intervening buildings, and something larger, something that made Zhang's stomach tighten, stepping out from behind a commercial tower on the far side of the intersection. An awesome 80 tons of assault mech mounting 3 particle projector cannons, each one capable of reaching across the boulevard and coring the torso of a heavy mech in 2 or 3 shots. The awesome moved with the deliberate patience of a machine that knew it was the most dangerous thing on the street. All iron units, engage. Lian, focus fire on the awesome. Keep its attention on your lance. Dao, flank south and hit the trebuchet before it gets those SRMs into the air. Chen, hold position and wait for my call. The intersection erupted. Lian's Marauder fired both PPCs simultaneously, the twin beams of charged particles scorching the air between the buildings and striking the Awesome's left torso in a cascade of vaporized armor. The waste heat was staggering. Zhang saw Lian's heat indicator spike on his command display, and he knew from experience that the inside of her cockpit had just jumped 15 degrees in under a second. She would need to pause, let the single heat sinks fight the thermal load back down, or risk pushing towards shutdown. Zhang raised his own weapons. The targeting reticle floated across the Orion's torso, and he squeezed the trigger for the autocannon 10. The weapon roared, a deep concussive bark that resonated through the cataphract's frame, and the cluster of high-velocity shells crossed the 150-meter gap in a fraction of a second, striking the Orion's right arm and chewing through armor plate in a spray of fragments. He followed with the PPC and his forward medium lasers, the beams invisible in the dust-choked air, except for the flashes of impact as they carved molten lines across the enemy mech's chest. Heat flooded his cockpit. The cataphract's heat sinks, 16 single-strength units, still inadequate for sustained alpha strikes, fought to dissipate the thermal surge, and Zhang felt the temperature climb past 45 degrees. Sweat ran freely down his face inside the neural helmet. The heat indicator on his console climbed into the yellow band. One more volley like that, and he would be approaching the red. The Orion returned fire. Its autocannon 10 thundered, and Zhang felt the impacts walk across his cataphract's center torso. 3 hits, maybe 4, each one a hammer blow that rattled his teeth and sent damage alerts cascading across his secondary display. Armor, not structure, not yet, but the cataphract carried less protection than its tonnage might suggest, a consequence of the designer's decision to mount a wide array of weapons at the cost of defensive plating. Iron 9 to Iron 1. Chen Mei's voice was sharp with urgency. I have infantry on the rooftops to our east. 4 buildings, multiple positions. They're setting up crew-served weapons. Looks like SRM launchers, and maybe a recoilless rifle team. Zhang glanced at his rear cameras. The buildings lining the boulevard behind them were 6 and 7 stories tall, rising well above his mech's head, and the rooftop parapets provided perfect cover for dismounted infantry. The Free Worlds League had layered their defense mechs in the intersection to fix the Capellan advance, infantry on the flanks to pour fire down from above where BattleMech armor was thinnest. It was a killing box. Iron 9. Can you engage the infantry positions without hitting the residential floors? A pause. Then Chen's voice, stripped of everything except professional honesty. Negative. Sangwei. The infantry is on the rooftops and inside the top 4 apartments. My AC-20 has the range. They're barely 100 meters out, but the penetration will go through the roof and into whatever's below. I can hear people screaming in those buildings. Zhang heard it too, not through his cockpit, which was sealed against everything except the reactor's hum and the artificial voice of his combat computer, but in his mind, where the screams had taken up residence 3 days ago and had not stopped. Hold fire on the infantry. Use your medium lasers on the Orion if you can get an angle. Short bursts. Copy. Chen's voice carried the same weighted tone Dao had used earlier, the tone that said, "This is going to get someone killed." The engagement lasted 14 minutes. In open field combat, 14 minutes was a skirmish. In the Yiling district, it was an eternity. The Awesome took concentrated fire from Lian's lance and eventually withdrew, trailing smoke from its savaged left torso, but not before one of its PPCs found Cao Lian's Marauder square in the center torso and blew through the last of the forward armor into the internal structure beneath. The Marauder staggered, and Zhang heard Lian's sharp intake of breath over the comms. But the machine stayed upright. The gyroscope held. The engine shielding held. She was lucky. Lucky was not a resource that lasted in the Yiling district. The Orion fell when Dao Kang's Crusader, having circled south through a service alley barely wide enough for the 65-ton machine, emerged behind it and fired both SRM 6 racks into its rear armor at a range of 30 meters. The short-range missiles, standard high-explosive warheads, not infernos, struck the Orion's thin rear plating and punched deep, and the Free Worlds League mech toppled forward into the wreckage of a transit station, its reactor scramlight visible through the dust. The trebuchet escaped. It was faster than anything in Zhang's company. 50 tons moving at 86 kilometers per hour when it opened up to a full run. And it disappeared into the warren of side streets before anyone could line up a shot. It would report back to the 6th Merrick Militia's command post, and the next ambush would be better prepared. Iron Company, advance and hold at the intersection. Damage reports. The reports were not good. Lian's Marauder had a breach in its center torso armor. 2 mechs and 2nd Lance had taken significant SRM damage from the rooftop infantry teams, who had fired with impunity throughout the engagement because Zhang had refused to authorize return fire into occupied buildings. His own cataphract had lost 30% of its forward torso armor and was running hot from the sustained exchange. And the infantry teams were still up there, on the rooftops, watching them through magnification optics and calling in their positions. Zhong Shaoqian's voice returned to the command frequency, precisely on schedule, as if the man had an alarm set. Iron 1, I am showing minimal advance. You should be past grid reference Yiling 17 by now. What is your status? Zhang told him. He used precise language and accurate damage figures, because the Zhongshao was a bureaucrat at heart and respected data more than emotion. He described the layered defense, the infantry positions, the rooftop SRM teams. He described the civilians. Sang Wei Zheng. The major's voice was patient, in the way that a blade is patient before it falls. The infantry teams must be neutralized. You have crusaders with SRM capability, and you have the ammunition to do the job. Use incendiary ordnance on the rooftop positions and advance Zhongshao. The rooftop positions are residential buildings, occupied residential buildings. Inferno missiles will set the structures on fire from the top down. The people inside will not be able to evacuate in time. The people inside had the opportunity to evacuate before our offensive began. Civil Affairs broadcast the withdrawal corridor 72 hours ago. Anyone remaining in the combat zone has made their choice. Zhang wanted to say, they didn't make a choice. They are poor, they are old, they are families with nowhere to go. The Free Worlds League didn't let them leave because they need human shields around their missile teams. You know this. I know this. And we are going to burn them anyway. He said, Understood, Zhongshao. Iron 1 out. He sat in his cockpit for a long moment, the heat pressing against him like a living thing, and stared at the damage display without seeing it. Somewhere below, and to the left, he heard the muffled crump of small arms fire. FWL infantry, exchanging shots with Capellan foot soldiers who were supposed to be clearing the buildings floor by floor, but who were outnumbered, outgunned, and dying in the stairwells. Dao, Zhang said on the Lance commander frequency. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Hollow. Load inferno rounds in your SRM racks. Already loaded, sang Wei. There was no judgment in Dao Kang's voice. No satisfaction either. Just the flat professionalism of a man who had known this order was coming. Next rooftop team that fires on us, you put infernos into their position. Top floor only. 1 volley. Copy. They advanced. The next 4 blocks were the worst hours of Jiang Wei Lin's life. The Inferno missiles did exactly what they were designed to do. The warheads burst on impact and scattered their payload of adhesive, hypercombustible gel across the rooftop and into the apartments below. The gel burned at temperatures that softened structural steel, and turned concrete into calcium powder. And it could not be extinguished by water, by foam, or by anything short of specialized chemical suppressants that no one in the Yiling district possessed. The first building caught fire at 1427 local time. By 1500, 4 buildings were burning, and the smoke column was visible from orbit. Zhang watched the first one burn through his cockpit cameras, and he told himself that the people inside had time to evacuate. He told himself that the stairwells were intact, that the fire would spread slowly enough, that the civil defense systems in a modern planetary capital would provide some protection. He told himself these things because the alternative was to acknowledge what his thermal sensors were showing him. Heat signatures on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors that moved frantically for 90 seconds and then stopped moving at all. Iron 5. Good effect on target. Dao transmitted after his second inferno volley. His voice was professional. Controlled. Rooftop position is neutralized. Zhang added the word to the growing lexicon of language he would never be able to hear again without tasting ash. They pushed deeper. The boulevard widened slightly as they entered what had been the Yiling district's commercial center, a broad avenue lined with shops and restaurants, and a central transit hub with an underground station that descended 3 levels below the street. The wider sightlines should have been a relief. Instead, they were a trap. Iron 2 to Iron 1. I have movement in the transit hub. Subterranean level. My seismics are showing something big. Mech scale footfalls. Maybe 2 contacts. Zhang's blood went cold. The underground transit tunnels. Battalion intelligence had flagged them as potential ambush corridors. But no, one had the infantry assets to clear 3 levels of underground infrastructure in advance of the mech assault. The tunnels were wide enough for medium mechs to traverse. The Beersheba transit system had been built with industrial-scale cargo cars, and a mech emerging from an underground access point directly beneath or behind the Capellan column would have a shot at rear armor at point-blank range. All units, halt. Iron 2, pull back from the transit hub entrance. Iron 9, cover the access ramps. There should be 3 in the commercial plaza. I see 2, Chen replied. Third, one might be in the building to the south, the department store. Iron 3, take your lance and check the ground erupted. The explosion came from directly beneath the street surface, 20 meters ahead of Lien's marauder, and it threw a column of asphalt, concrete, and subterranean infrastructure 10 meters into the air. Through the debris, something climbed out of the earth. A hunchback, Free World's League colors, barely visible beneath a coating of tunnel grime. Its massive Tomozuru Type 20 autocannon, already leveled. The AC-20 fired at a range of less than 40 meters. At that distance, the weapon was apocalyptic. The cluster of 200mm shells struck the marauder's already damaged center torso and punched through the breached armor like a fist through wet paper. Zhang heard the sound over his external microphones, a deep, wet crunch, like a giant breaking bone, and Lien's marauder shuddered from crown to foot. Lien! Zhang was already moving, his cataphract surging forward with every kilogram of its 70-ton mass. He fired the autocannon 10 on the move, A wild shot that struck the hunchback's left arm and did nothing meaningful, and followed it with the PPC, which carved a line of molten slag across the enemy mech's shoulder. But the hunchback was not alone. A second mech emerged from the collapsed transit tunnel behind it. A Wolverine, 55 tons, moving fast, its autocannon 5 chattering as it laid suppressive fire across the boulevard. And behind the Wolverine, in the shadows of the tunnel mouth, Zhang's thermosensors showed more heat signatures. Infantry. A full platoon, at least, pouring out of the underground, with shoulder-fired SRM launchers and man-portable laser rifles. Iron Company, this is Iron 1. All units engage. Chen, I need that AC-20 on the hunchback now. Chen Mei's hunchback stepped out from behind the parking structure and fired. The AC-20 spoke with a sound like thunder breaking, and its shells crossed the 60-meter gap and struck the enemy hunchback in the left torso. Armor shattered. Internal structure buckled. The Free Worlds League mech staggered sideways, and its pilot fought the controls to keep it upright. But the damage was catastrophic. One of the shells had found the ammunition bin for the enemy's own AC-20, and Zhang saw the telltale flash of a munitions cook-off beginning in the torso cavity. The enemy pilot ejected. The explosive bolts blew the cockpit canopy free, and the ejection seat streaked upward on a column of rocket thrust, carrying the mech warrior clear of the machine a half-second before the ammunition detonated and turned the hunchback's torso into a pillar of fire that blew out the windows of every building within 50 meters, including the buildings full of people. Zhang watched the glass cascade downward like a glittering waterfall, and he watched the civilians on the lower floors, the ones who had been sheltering behind those windows, flinch and fall and crawl. And he added another image to the gallery of things he would see when he closed his eyes for the rest of his life. Dao, put infernos into that tunnel mouth. Seal it. The Crusaders' SRM racks rippled fire, and 12 inferno missiles streaked across the boulevard and detonated in and around the transit tunnel entrance. The gel splashed across the concrete and ignited, creating an impassable curtain of chemical fire that sealed the underground access point and, incidentally, trapped anyone still inside the tunnel in a furnace. The Wolverine, caught on the wrong side of the inferno barrier, tried to run. It made it half a block before concentrated fire from 3 of Zhang's mechs brought it down. Autocannon rounds and laser beams converging on its legs until the left knee actuator failed, and it crashed face first into the remains of a noodle restaurant. The engagement was over in 4 minutes. 4 minutes that cost the Free Worlds League 2 BattleMechs and an unknown number of infantry. 4 minutes that cost the city of Beersheba another. 2 buildings burning, another block of shattered glass and cratered streets, and a number of civilian casualties that Zhang could estimate, but chose not to. Iron 2 status report, he said into the comms. Lien, talk to me. Static. Then, slowly, Lien's voice, thinner than before, strained in a way that had nothing to do with military discipline. Iron 2 is still standing some way. Center torso is breached. I've got atmosphere alarms going off, and my engine shielding is showing yellow. I can fight, but if I take another center torso hit, I'm done. Pull back to the rear of the formation. You're on overwatch only. Copy. A pause. Wei Lin. She had used his given name. She never used his given name on comms. How many more blocks? He checked his tactical display. The Suzhou River, their objective, was 8 blocks away. 8 blocks of the same densely packed urban terrain. The same residential towers. The same rooftop ambush positions and underground transit tunnels. 8 more blocks of burning buildings and civilians who could not leave. 8, he said. Lien said nothing. The silence said everything. They pushed forward. The afternoon sun was swallowed by the smoke that now hung over the Yiling district in a gray-brown pall. And the temperature inside Zhang's cockpit crept steadily upward as his heat sinks fought a losing battle against the ambient heat of a burning city. His cooling vest had stopped functioning an hour ago. The circulation pump had failed, a maintenance issue that his technicians would have caught in garrison, but that combat operations left no time to address. He was cooking inside his own machine, and the sweat that ran down his arms and pooled in his command couch had taken on the salty, metallic taste of a body being pushed past its limits. At Block 21, they found the field hospital. It was a school, an elementary school, converted by the Free Worlds League into a forward medical station, with red crescent banners hanging from the second-floor windows and a crude landing pad marked on the playground for VTOL medical evacuation. Zhang's tactical overlay flagged it as a protected structure under the Ares conventions, and he ordered the company to route around it. They lost 7 minutes on the detour, and Zhong Shaoqiang noticed. Iron 1, you are deviating from the clearance corridor. Return to Primary Avenue and advance. Battalion, there is a marked medical facility at grid reference Yiling 21. We are routing around, per the Ares conventions. Iron 1, the Ares conventions protect facilities that are not being used for military advantage. Intelligence indicates the 6th Merrick Militia is using medical facilities as ammunition storage and command and control nodes. You are not required to respect a flag being used as a shield. Zhang stared at the school through his cockpit cameras. He could see wounded being carried inside on stretchers. Some of them wore Free Worlds League uniforms. Some of them were wearing civilian clothes. With respect, Zhong Shao, I am not going to fire on a school full of wounded. The silence on the command frequency was absolute. Zhang could feel every pilot in his company listening, and he could feel the weight of what he had just done. Not quite disobedience. Not yet, but something close enough to smell the same. Sangwei Zhang. Qiang's voice was ice. You will advance through the designated corridor. You will clear every structure flagged as a military objective. If you are unable to execute these orders, I will relieve you and place Xiaowei Dao in command. Are we clear? We are clear, Zhong Shao. Then advance. Zhang routed around the school. He did not fire on it. He added this small defiance to the ledger he was keeping in his mind, the ledger of things he had refused to do, set against the ledger of things he had done, and he was not certain which column was longer. Block 23. Block 24. The Free Worlds League resistance intensified as they approached the river. The 6th Merrick militia had established a defensive line along a broad commercial boulevard 2 blocks from the waterfront. And they had fortified it with everything they had. BattleMechs, hull down behind reinforced barricades, infantry in every building, and at least 1 lance of armor, vedette, medium tanks, old but functional, concealed in underground parking garages, with ramps angled to provide firing positions on the approaching Capellan column. Zhang halted his company and studied the position. It was strong, not unbreakable, but reducing it would require the kind of firepower that would level the surrounding neighborhood. And the surrounding neighborhood was full of apartment towers, 12 to 15 stories tall, every one of them still partially occupied by civilians who had not fled, or could not flee, or had been prevented from fleeing by FWL troops who wanted human shields between themselves and the advancing Capellan mechs. Iron Company, Iron 1. We are going to push through the center of the defensive line. Now, I want your Crusader forward with me. We'll use missile fire to suppress the barricade positions. Lien, I know you're damaged, but I need your PPCs. Can you give me 2 shots? Sung Wei, maybe 3. After that, my heat is going to redline, and I'll need to shut down weapons to cool. 2 shots is enough. Chen, you're my breach weapon. When Dao and I suppress the barricade, you advance to 100 meters and put your AC-20 into whatever's behind it. 1 shot, center mass. Copy. Iron 1. He took a breath. The air in his cockpit tasted like ozone, and sweat and something else. Something acrid that might have been smoke seeping through his life support filters from the burning city outside. Iron Company, weapons free. Advance. The final assault on the 6th Merrick Militia's defensive line lasted 22 minutes. It was the longest 22 minutes of the war. Zhang fired his autocannon 10 and PPC together, felt the heat spike savage his cockpit, watched his heat scale climb into the amber band, and held fire for 20 agonizing seconds, while his heat sinks dragged the thermal load back toward manageable levels. Then, he fired again, and again. The cataphract was not designed for sustained combat in an urban environment. No BattleMech was, but it was rugged, and its weapon mix gave it options at every range bracket the city's compressed geometry offered. Dao Kang's Crusader advanced beside him, and its SRM racks fired inferno rounds. Had the SRMs carried standard warheads, they would have shattered ferrocrete and twisted steel barricades. Carrying infernos, they struck buildings. Zhang had stopped giving the order. Dao made the calls himself now, selecting targets with the cold efficiency of a man who had accepted the arithmetic of the situation. Every rooftop team that survived would fire missiles into the rear armor of the advancing company. And rear armor was thin, and the next hit on Lian's marauder might kill her. The infernos burned. The buildings burned. The people inside them ran or burned with them, and Zhang watched it all through his cameras, with an expression that his neuro-helmet's biometric sensors would have flagged as dangerously flat affect if anyone had been monitoring. The Awesome appeared again. It had been repaired, partially, the left torso still showing exposed internal structure beneath hastily welded armor patches, and it anchored the FWL defensive line with the patient. Implacable menace that 80 tons of assault mech projected simply by existing. Its 3 PPCs fired in sequence, each bolt of artificial lightning crossing the 200-meter engagement range in an instant. And the first bolt struck Zhang's cataphract in the right arm and vaporized the particle projector cannon mounted there. The damage alarm screamed. Zhang's right arm display went red. Weapon destroyed. Actuator damaged. Structural integrity compromised. His primary long-range energy weapon was gone, and with it, half his ability to engage targets beyond the autocannon's effective range. Iron 9, the Awesome is yours. Take the shot. Chen Mei's hunchback stepped into the boulevard with the particular mechanical swagger of a pilot who had been waiting for this moment. The AC-20 rose, tracking, and Chen fired at 60 meters, well within the weapon's devastating short-range bracket. The 200mm shells struck the Awesome's center torso in a tight cluster, and the impact was visible as a physical deformation of the assault mech's chest plate. The Awesome rocked backward. Its pilot fired a PPC in response, the bolt going wide and striking the building facade. And then, Lien's Marauder fired both PPCs from 300 meters back, the twin beams converging on the Awesome's damaged left torso, destroying the section and transferring into the center torso's fusion reactor shielding. The Awesome's reactor scrammed. The massive machine went dark, weapons silent, myomer musculature locking as power died. And it toppled backward like a felled tree, 80 tons of dead metal crashing through the barricade it had been defending, and crushing a vedette tank that had been positioned behind it. The FWL line broke. Zhang watched the remaining Free Worlds League mechs withdraw toward the river, moving fast, no longer fighting a coordinated defense, but simply running. The infantry followed where they could, abandoning rooftop positions and ground floor strongpoints, and melting into the ruins in small groups. Some of them shed their uniforms as they ran. Iron Company. Ceasefire. Ceasefire. Zhang's voice was hoarse. All units hold position and report. The reports came in. 11 mechs standing. Liam's Marauder was critically damaged. Center torso breached. Right arm actuator failed. Heat sinks operating at 50% capacity. 2 other mechs had amber structural warnings. Ammunition was low across the board. Zhang's own cataphract was missing its right arm weapon and had less than 40% of its forward armor remaining. But the line was broken. The Yiling corridor was clear from the staging area to within 2 blocks of the Suzhou River, and the 6th Marek Militia's forward defensive position no longer existed. Iron 1 to Battalion. Yiling corridor is clear to grid reference Yiling 26. Enemy defensive line is broken. 6th Marek Militia is in retreat toward the river. Request permission to hold position and consolidate. Outstanding work, Iron 1. Permission granted. Hold position and await relief. 2nd Battalion will pass through your lines at 0600 tomorrow. Battalion out. Outstanding work. Zhang powered down his weapons and sat in the silence of his cockpit. The heat was still oppressive. 47 degrees, his suit soaked through, his hands trembling with the fine tremor that was equal parts exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Through his forward cameras, he could see the Yiling district. It was burning. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. A dozen buildings were on fire, their upper floors consumed by inferno gel that would burn for hours. And the smoke rose in columns that merged into a single dark mass that blotted out the late afternoon sun and cast the ruined boulevard into a premature twilight. Emergency sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Civilian fire services, overwhelmed, responding to a disaster they could not contain. The sound was thin and desperate, and utterly inadequate. Zhang opened his cockpit hatch. The manual release was stiff. The actuator had taken damage during the engagement, and he had to brace his feet and push with both hands before the armored plate swung upward and the air of Beersheba hit him. It smelled like burning. Not the clean burn of a campfire or the sharp chemical stink of a reactor leak, but the heavy, greasy, organic smell of a city on fire. Insulation, plastic, wood, fabric, and underneath it all, something sweet and terrible that Zhang recognized from his training and from his nightmares, and from the part of his brain that understood exactly what was burning in those apartments where the heat signatures had stopped moving. He climbed down the external ladder on the cataphract's right leg. 12 meters of rungs and handholds, the metal hot enough to feel through his gloves, and stood on the broken asphalt of the boulevard. The street was covered in debris, chunks of concrete, shattered glass, spent shell casings the size of his forearm, and a fine gray dust that coated everything and got into his eyes and his throat and his lungs. His boots crunched on the glass as he walked forward. He did not walk far. 20 meters from his mech, he found them. They were sitting on the curb in front of what had been a pharmacy. A woman, perhaps 60 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a style that Zhang's mother had favored, and beside her, 2 children, a boy and a girl, neither older than 8. The woman had a burn on her forearm, the skin bright red and already blistering, and the children's faces were streaked with ash and tears. They stared up at Zhang with the wide, unblinking eyes of small animals that have learned that the world contains things that can hurt them, and that there is nowhere safe. Zhang stared back. He was still wearing his cooling vest and his neuro helmet, and he knew what he looked like. A tall figure in a sweat-stained pilot suit, his face gaunt from dehydration and heat exposure, his eyes carrying the flat, 1,000-meter stare of a man who had spent 6 hours killing people and watching people die. The woman said something. Her words were in the local dialect of Mandarin, thickly accented, and it took Zhang a moment to parse them through his exhaustion. Is it over? He looked at the burning buildings. He looked at the smoke. He looked at the 2 children, who had not spoken, and who, he realized, might not speak for a very long time. Yes, he said, this part is over. The woman nodded. She did not thank him. She did not curse him. She simply gathered the children closer and looked away, and Zhang stood there on the broken glass and the ash and understood that he had secured the sector, that the mission was accomplished, that 2nd Battalion would pass through tomorrow and push the 6th Marek militia back across the Suzhou River, and that the Capellan Confederation would hold Zion, and that none of it was worth what it had cost. He walked back to his cataphract. The machine loomed above him in the twilight. 13 meters of battered metal and depleted weapons, its armor scarred and pitted, its right arm hanging useless where the PPC had been. It was ugly. It had always been ugly. The cataphract was not a mech that inspired poetry or awe. It was a tool, designed to kill other tools. And today it had done its job with brutal efficiency. Zhang climbed the ladder, rung by rung, hand over hand, pulling himself back up into the cockpit that smelled of sweat and ozone and recycled air. He lowered himself into the command couch and sealed the hatch, and the sounds of the burning city dropped away, replaced by the soft hum of the fusion reactor and the quiet beep of the damage alerts, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of his own heartbeat in the neurohelmet's acoustic padding. He keyed the Lance commander frequency one last time. Iron Company, this is Iron 1. Set up a perimeter and power down to standby. Rotating watch. 4-hour shifts. Get some rest if you can. He paused. You fought well today. All of you. The acknowledgements came back. Lien's was quiet. Dao's was crisp. Chen's carried a note of something that might have been exhaustion or might have been grief. They were good soldiers. They had followed his orders, and they had held the line, and they had done terrible things because he had told them to. And tomorrow they would do terrible things again because the war demanded it. And the day after that, and the day after that, until the war ended, or they did. Zhang Weilin, Sangwei Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Capellan Chargers, Capellan Confederation Armed Forces, leaned back in his command couch and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, the heat signatures moved frantically on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors. Then they stopped. He opened his eyes. The damaged display glowed amber in the darkness of his cockpit, patient and precise, cataloging everything that was broken in his machine. It could not catalog what was broken in him. No diagnostic existed for that. No technician could repair it. No amount of time in garrison or medals pinned to his dress uniform or carefully worded after-action reports explaining that civilian casualties were within acceptable parameters would put back together the thing inside him that had come apart. Somewhere between the first inferno volley and the old woman sitting on the curb. Through the smoke, distantly, he could see the Suzhou River. Tomorrow, 2nd Battalion would cross it. The war would continue. The Capellan Confederation would call it liberation. The Free Worlds League would call it aggression. The people of Beersheba would call it something else entirely. Something that had no translation in any military lexicon. Something that lived in the eyes of children who had stopped speaking. Zhang did not sleep. He sat in his cockpit and watched the city burn, and he counted the fires, and he wondered if there was a number, a specific, quantifiable number of burning buildings and silenced heat signatures and old women with burned forearms, beyond which duty became something else, something with a different name, something that no oath of service and no order from a Zhong Shao and no flag of any great house could justify. He did not find the number. He suspected there was no number. He suspected that the line between duty and atrocity was not a line at all, but a gradient, a slow fade from one to the other, so subtle that you could not point to the moment of crossing, only look back and realize you had crossed it long ago. The fires burned, the smoke rose. Somewhere in the ruins, a child was crying. Jiang Wei-lin sat in the dark and listened, and the Yiling district burned around him, and he did not move, and he did not look away.